Perfect. And I think we should go ahead and get started. Manuel, I believe you're up first. Are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go. Just 1 second here.
And then we can also continue. If you haven't gotten a chance to submit your answer, I'll put the question into the chat and you can continue to send those in. Thanks.
Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
It looks like, yeah, perfect.
Hello. So I'm very happy and fortunate to share with you our work and our space here in Guayaquil, Ecuador. Thank you, Tessa, for this opportunity. I was fortunate enough to meet with you guys a few month ago when you guys did a presentation on Puerto Rico. I'm an expat living here in Ecuador almost now 7 years, and we started a practice of architectural landscape and urbanism that sort of deals with nature-based solutions and ideas for the environment, trying to sort of allow for this kind of design to be at the forefront of our practice. Our space is small. We call it the lab. Most of us are architects, but as you know, we all have this sort of presence, a need for engaging the environment, and it's quite different from the context of the United States or Europe, where the sort of tradition of ecology and landscape and physical science is more present in the sort of professional environment. Here we are a little bit behind within sort of technologies that sort of allow us to sort of think in this matter, but it is still a sort of a good moment in history to make a big change towards this kind of movement. This practice was co-founded by my wife and me, which is Fabiana Alvear. We're both are Cornell grads from architecture school. She's also an urbanist from the GSD, the Graduate School of Design at Harvard, and I'm a landscape architect from the Graduate School of Design. My wife and my partner, Fabiana, is also interested in researching states that have in their constitution the right to housing. So she is really engaged in sort of the minimal form of housing, not only at the architectural level, but also at the political and sort of urban models that each city sort of develops. On my part of the practice, I'm interested in sort of the ecological forms that we could engage architecture and the practice of landscape design. So we're trying to sort of feel a different context for our city. We decided to call our practice Intemperie, which in Latin is from the Intemperie, which is inequality and disparity of time, because we need to sort of engage the idea of being outside, you know, the idea of nature not being something foreign. If not, I would call it, or some other people will call it nature 2.0, something that we have to be really, really aware and engage at all times. This is our context. Ecuador is a relatively small country, but very fortunate in many ways because you could find the 4 seasons just by crossing the landscape. You could go from the Amazon to the Andes, find snow, to the desert, to the wet, to the beach. So it is a place that many thinkers, starting from Darwin, at the Galapagos, and Humboldt with his drawings of the Chimborazo and the taxonomy of nature, have thought through a Western tradition about the landscape. And not only we could sort of engage in Western traditions, but also the idea of Pachamama, which is sort of native Ecuadorian local context of Mother Nature. It is a place that it's still an agro country, so the production and the sort of physical presence of the landscape is very vital. These are the sites where our projects are located. Our city is in the Guayas, which is down here where it says Guayaquil, San Borondón, Daule, and Taura, which is what I call the metropolitan city of Guayaquil. It is probably one of the largest estuaries in this part of the continent in South America. It's a system that is brackish, and it's about 4 hours from the ocean. And to my presence being here, it's quite fascinating to live above water at all times and living within water at all times. So what is our strategy as Intemperie Studio tries to do in our practice is try to use landscape as a means of urbanism, always starting with the context and always starting with the ground as urbanism. So our strategy starts usually with the existing conditions. This is just a simple diagram that sort of tries to take the barren land, try to put some water, trying to see what the local vegetation, and try to figure out the sort of seasonality in order to make it a productive landscape. Taking from ecology and means of sort of looking at forests, we know that succession over time, it starts with softwoods, shrubs, and then it becomes into hardwoods. And if we look at the history of the United States and the eastern sort of, or the old colonies, 13 colonies, most of the forests that we see today are just abandoned farms. So it takes a process of 50 to 100 years to sort of to see a sort of robust ecosystem. So what is the research that I have been engaging here is because we live in a city and there's this dilemma between native and invasive species. But the city for me at a sort of very basic form, we can look at it as a sort of a glacier landscape. It is a soil that it doesn't have the sort of conditions of that it previously existed before we arrive as sort of humans. But what I have been trying to do is to make a calendar and trying to collect sort of data that allows us to find plants that are pre-adapted to the urban context. You know, the beautiful thing about the tropics is that it's very cosmopolitan, and it doesn't judge very limited boundaries. So plants could move along very quickly. Plants arrive by illegal trade, but plants also arrive by birds and seeds. And I've been trying to map what are the calendar of flowering seasons and fruits from the city of Guayaquil to try to have a more robust vegetation to apply to my projects. So looking at plants that like limestone, which is our paved walks, and plants that are actually a little bit more robust to the sort of heat island effects that have in the area. These are some of the images that our office produced. We try to produce a lot of density and overplanting. It is a tradition that it's not that it's not seen here very quite often welcoming because of sort of the idea of not being able to see and darkness that it produced. But at the end of the day, the sort of overplanting and density, it starts to make bigger effects and ecological change in the area. So formal strategies that we usually use are are the point, the line, the quincux, and the alley. Those are just formal ideas. So for you to sort of understand how we started composing spaces, and then we become to sort of larger pieces within the landscape, the grove, the woodland, the orchard, and the nursery. These are traditions that are rooted in the English landscape, but at the end of the day are ways that we could engage into the practice of producing landscape. And once we have a combination of all these things, we could create a larger mosaic, you know, and a mosaic then could become a patch, a corridor, and an island within sort of the projects that we're looking at. So I'm going to talk very quickly about 4 projects that we are engaging right now. One that is a productive landscape, that is a rural scape. It's a farm that is being translated from sugar, cattle, and cacao to a more sort of eco hotel friendly place. I mean, it's not new that these kind of projects have become in colder climates, like the wineries in Sonoma and in Bordeaux, where you have like a more presence of ecotourism, but now the tropics are trying to adapt a similar autonomy in that regard. So in this case, what is for me trying to like produce a landscape that it's with the lowest minimum means. So at the end of the day, what we want to change is the topography and the water. So we set up a series of cross sections that allows us to define different conditions of how we sort of manipulate the landscape, traverse, move water, and create these sort of different sort of ecotones around the area. So secondary roads, main roads have a different sort of character, and it starts to sort of produce different diversity and densities. As far as for inhabiting the architecture, I call it the mesa, because we cannot sort of change the entire topography of the place. So what we're projecting is if we get the lot, we start to sort of like change a little bit of the topography in order to change the nature of the scape, and at the end of the day, they could replenish the forest at that condition. This is the master plan. It is an whole as a hacienda that it's about 100 years old, with the main house on the right corner, and at the right side, you have a small town with the church and the cemetery, and these were all sort of cattle farming conditions, and now we want to make it into sort of an orchard that starts to, with these roads, create smaller corridors, larger corridors, and it becomes a larger productive landscape, from having fruits, vegetables, not only for the consumption of the hotel, but also in order to produce this sort of a forest density in the place. These are some of the images that we produce for the client, you know, trying to be a little bit more seductive, not only because at the end of the day, it has to be more sensible than the architecture. It has to be a place about observing the character of the place. And the tradition of, for me, the tradition of landscape or going outside, it's back to the Romanticism, where it is, and the Impressionists, where they actually left the studio in order to paint outside and engage this experience of the outdoors. And the idea is to create these objects that sort of feels within the density of the vegetation. At the same time, we have worked with tougher conditions in Ecuador. In 2016, 2016, we suffered a major earthquake, and we were fortunate enough to be part of a sort of reconstruction effort in Pedernales, and it's a city that is sort of a void within it's above ground. It's on the Pacific coast in the northern Esmeralda region, and when we arrived to the city, there was a large sort of devastation of sort of the main sort of artery of the place. We arrived from the Via Esmeralda at the top, and you could see this sort of major sort of void within the city. What we tried as a practice is sort of look at what were the ecological conditions of the place, where were the main rivers, where were the main arteries of roads, the main green areas that we could sort of engage to sort of connect the city again and provide a different space, not only for humans, but also at the same time for the non-humans. But being a sort of memorial and slash sort of reconstruction, it had to be a place that could be a void within the city. And at the end of the day, we began by using two materials, which is the planter, which is where the trees will go, and the palms, and the cobblestones, which are impervious with their pervious surfaces, and will allow for the city to sort of have this duality between the spaces. These are some of the drawings that we were working on. It's a very topographic city, engaging the terracing system, allowing for other programs to be in it, like skateboarding, sports, but at the same time creating over the hard surface a big forest. The detail is quite simple because since it's a land of scarce resources, we wanted to be able to produce with one detail the most amount of change. So, like I said, it's the planter and the cobblestone, and taking from the Italians what would this landscape look like. So at the end of the day, it's a big forest, and we started with a topographic map, sort of in trying to map where the surfaces and the running water will be, having a memorial space. Later on, the sort of hard surface that will guide the water through the guide the water through the surface, and later on the vegetation. In this case, the vegetation was considered to be from the area and a little bit cosmopolitan. And by the time we're arriving to the sea, we're trying to change the topographic notions in order to make a more robust vegetation through the area. It is a project that is very close to the ground for me, and close to sort of the sensibility, because we spend quite a lot of time in the territory, allowing us to sort of see and change the perspective of the place. Sadly, as governments go, things sort of not pan out to be constructed. On the other hand, I have worked also on smaller islands and places that I call waterscapes, which is places where the conditions of the place are very bare and scarce. And this is the Muisne Island in the north, where basically it is a flooding zone by the monsoon season, and it's a very beautiful location. It is separated from the continent, and but its means of transportation is this gabarra, or boat that sort of like moves the locals between the continent and the place. So I call it waterscape. This is the city. It had a it grew informally. You can see the continent to the right side, separated by the estuary, and then the Pacific Ocean on the left side. The city has been, most of the cities on top of mangrove. It has a big sanitary outflow into the river, and these people, the locals are in risk at all times of being flooding. So we started again with the topography in order to sort of look at how we could make regrow and push back the sort of development into grow the mangrove again by making a little incisions in the topography in order to sort of create channels for the water flow to be replenished again. At the end of the day, there's objects in the landscape. We started with a beach club, which is not really a beach club, but it's just a big palapa with some services in order for the locals to engage in their tourism activity, an experimental station for the Ministry of Environment here, so they could like replenish and work with mangrove systems. The major ecological diagram is the changing of the roads. These roads, since this city don't have cars, they have these sort of little motorcycles that have like a little cabin in the back. So what we decided is to change how the figure of the street in order to sort of connect the waters across the landscape in order to move faster these flooding events. So all the roads are trying to have open channels in order to sort of flow the water into the main area. If I go back very quickly, you can see that at the middle, we have a big, in number 9, we have a big park that is basically a giant water treatment plant where we were collecting the sort of water from the city, the runoff water, and infiltrating it at the center. So these roads would allow us to sort of, with these 3 types of roads, would allow us to move the water quicker. This is the formal quality of it. We have to make some public spaces for like music and Afrocultural region and a community space. But looking at it through the landscape and ecological forms, it allows us to sort of change the scheme of the city. And at the end of the day, this giant infiltration pond or water treatment plant will have this sort of park that becomes inundated and dry during the seasons and host different soccer fields and volleyball courts and bridges and places for the community to be fully engaged in the outside. This is a topographic map that shows how the quality of the place will be and how the water sort of moves from the street into this park. So when we think about seasons in this area, you have the idea of being above the sky and being in this natural wonder, but at the same time in a place that you could start to record the seasons by looking at water sort of fill in the ponds and dry up the ponds across the landscape. Finally, this is a project that we're working today in the city, most of Guayaquil. It's landfill over the mangrove. Yeah, as you can see, this is I call it the last hub. It's one of the largest, smallest spaces that the city has within the sort of suburbs, and it's a sanitary mess. It's been people had just been dumping rubble and materials of constructions and things in order to sort of have their housing on top of it. This is the site. It's right at the edge of the city. We have major infrastructure like grain silos, but you also have a very, very dense population that do not have major public spaces. And this is a piece of land that has some mangroves on it, and the sort of irrigation and hydrology has been affected because of this landfill over time. So in this project, our idea is to sort of take the site and look at the main topographic vectors and hydrological vectors, which allows us to make some cuts in the landscape, and these cuts will change the dynamics of the water in order to produce a new form of urbanism. It's something that maybe not be clear, but the tides of the Guayas River is about 3 meters daily. So it's a very, very sort of zone that allows for the movement of water quite frankly. And for us, it was in order to restore this sort of islands within the context. It was just to make cuts and fills in order to create conditions for the sort of mangrove to become a little bit stronger. This is sort of the sketch, the rough sketch of the place. As you can see, it's just a series of cuts that allows for the water to move in, a series of parks that allows for the surface to be in. They had an idea of putting a cemetery in the place, but we're scratching that. It's not a good place for it. But the idea is to introduce a more visible domain for people to engage in the practice of landscape and engage the landscape at a more forefront. These are our ecological sections where we are allowing for the user to touch and sort of feel the necessity to be engaging within the water. Something that I have noticed here is that that we are always looking at back to the water. We're not really admiring the magnitude of this estuarine system. So we have to be able to take the users and give them a more tactile form of engaging with the water. This is the site. These are the images that we show the municipality of Guayaquil, where we're trying to get this project across the board. We're looking for funding, and this is what the place will look like. And at the end of the day, for us, is to get back into a more habitable zone of the water. This is pretty much it. This is our office. If you have any questions, comments, I'll be very happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. And yes, we are at time, so please send Manuel any questions or comments through the chat. We're going to go ahead and get started with Tadhg. Are you there, Tadhg?
Yeah, it's good afternoon here, actually. Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for that inspirational walkthrough. I think everybody has been inspired by that presentation. Thanks so much, Manuel.
No problem. Thank you.
Unfortunately, there's a bit more perspiration than inspiration in this project. So let me try enthuse you about it anyway. So we all know what nature-based solutions are, and I'll highlight the context in which we're working. I'll walk you through some of the innovations we have, and some of those are actually within the project and actually have been inspired by the work of the NATURA network. For example, we have a mentoring program, which, certainly I know it's something NATURA have been discussing, and that's something that we were able to work on in our project. So our tagline is a natural way to foster urban health and well-being. We're part of a group of projects funded to promote urban health in European cities, but with a wider global perspective. And I'll come back to that global perspective in a few moments. So I'm an environmental psychologist based at Manuel University, a very green campus in the periphery of our capital city, Dublin. So it's about 21 kilometers from the capital. And of course, Ireland itself is a small island on the periphery of Western Europe. And the debate is often whether we look more to Boston or to Berlin. And I can tell you one thing we do, we have to look outside of our island for innovations and inspiration, because we're so small in scale that we really want to partner up and collaborate, and that's pretty much why we're here today. So I'm just going to give you a quote from one of our most famous statespersons or stateswomen, which is Mary Robinson. She's the former UN High Commissioner for Refugees, and her quote was that climate change is the moonshot of this generation. And I actually, as a psychologist, look at this and has positive framing. We have Mars lunar explorers. We know that the Chinese have been the latest to land or send craft into space successfully, and there's now almost more than 50 years of experience at this, which is quite interesting. In other words, the possibilities are probabilities if we work together, if we have a shared mandate and agenda. And I just like to highlight that, look, some of the stars are aligning in this respect. And I'm going to highlight that in a moment and just tell you a little bit about project flow and structure, the learning ecosystem we have, our interlinkages, innovations, and if you use Twitter, you can follow us at GoGreenRoutes. We're really concerned with both the benefits and co-benefits of nature-based solutions. Now, although more than 53% of research in NBS sector has said that they're concerned or measure health outcomes, it hasn't been the primacy of what they do. The primacy has been the environmental ecosystem benefits, the climate mitigation role. And I think that functionality is really important, but perhaps the spotlight of COVID has amplified the potential for a focus on human health and that interaction between biodiversity, green space, and human health. So that's really what we prioritize, human and environmental health and the interlinkages. So this is one of those complex flow diagrams to show we're not just an NBS project, we actually have a significant amount of digital and social innovation. So, some of it isn't entirely unique. We've urban well-being labs in cities. Some of the more unique aspects would be something like virtual reality. So we're looking at digital nature, not as a way of replacing, our authentic nature experiences, but to connect or reconnect citizens to their natural environments, especially in the urban context. And I'll give you a quote again from an Irish person. So this is Nobel laureate Seamus Heaney, whom the current US president often quotes. And I have, adjusted this quote to say, nature is where hope and history rhyme. So nature, has these properties of resilience, of homeostasis, of metamorphosis, which remind us, that our past is governed very much by our future, but we can adapt. And I think that resilient nature we have, both within natural ecosystems and psychological resilience, as we, recover from COVID, for example, is really important. So I won't dwell on these aspects, but I'll just try to highlight some of the other elements as we go through this discussion. So, we were mandated to, work across at least 4 European cities. We ended up working with 6. It's really it's really interesting, the cities that we've chosen to work with. But we also have connectivity with Mexico through a partner, with a research lab in Beijing, and with an organization in Tbilisi, Georgia, for knowledge exchange. In other words, you know, just like an Irish person or many centuries ago who would have sought to explore the world, we actually have to go out and work and explore the global context of what we do to find partners to work with. So we're a 4-year project. We started last September. The total budget is in excess of 11 million euros. We have 40 partner organizations. Just to be clear, I have more partners on this project than I do Facebook friends. And we work across 18 countries and beyond, actually. There are almost 30 PhD students working on this project, and that's a significant number in scale, but also in diversity, something I'll return to explain. The cities we work with, I should be able to explain just the structure first, sorry. So structure is myself as coordinator at Manuel with our project manager and project admin, but we actually work within quite a complex system. And I think it's actually worth pausing some time and say, you know, what influences us, what drives us, who do we have shared mandates and objectives with? And that's, you know, going to be something quite important for us over the period of our project. And I'll try to explain that in a little bit more detail. For sure, we have the same, you know, complex work package type structure that other projects have. We have a number of innovations, and one of them is called a citizen voice monitor. And their role is to ensure that across work packages and within cities, the voice of the unseen and unheard is amplified. We think inclusion is a really important part of projects in the current context. Just to take us forward, this is a snapshot of the 6 cities that we work with. Generally, we're looking at cities of circa 100,000, with the exception of Tallinn, which is the capital of Estonia. Now, there's something really unique about our cities, right? So Versailles, under its mayoral leadership, have really been working on creating this ville nature, so this natural city, and promoting the use of green spaces for health. European Green Capital is Lahti, and another capital, Tallinn, is not just a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but Tallinn has been nominated for the European Green Capital 2022. And Limerick in Ireland is actually being nominated for the European Green Flag, which is the, you know, within the same scheme, another award. Umeå has an immense reputation in terms of genderized interventions for health and physical activity. So there's some really interesting synergies here. These are, in the main, high-performing cities who are trying to make that extra step forward to optimize what they're doing, partly because they have, you know, very ambitious scales for expansion. Limerick is planned to increase in population from 100,000 to 200,000 over the next 20 years. As you can see, with that ambition, they're going to need a lot of planning, thinking, and implementation of NBS to optimize their human and environmental health. Just give you a hint of this context I explained. We have the European Green Deal. We have, you know, according to WEF, we have 280 million euros in Horizon funding. We have 133 billion annually in sustainable solutions. We have the most recent biodiversity strategy from European Commission. We have the UN Global Compact on NBS for climate. We have post-COVID realities. Now, that's something we're actually researching in our project, which, you know, started just less than a year ago. We were advised to include questions about mental health and about how people's opportunities for new habits and for change in cities could be understood through some research questions. So we amended our actual proposal during COVID times to encompass some of these interesting questions. IUCN have developed their own NBS concepts, And there's obviously interlinkages with the UN SDGs. So the UN SDGs are a very powerful framework that we can use to map some of our actions and to guide what we're doing in cities. So some cities, for example, have UN SDG scorecards. We're hoping to advance some of the indicators that can be used and the metrics can be used. So cities get, really fine-grained information on how they are working towards these 2030 targets. Just to highlight, some of the networks we work with would be the Coordination and Support Action Network NATURA with its various task forces. We work with OPLI, who actually are a partner of our project. And NATURA is one of those overarching bodies which gives us access to, a whole family of experts, the potential to work with, we call next gen, or the next generation of researchers and innovators in this area, and to see best practice from around the world, as we were lucky enough to witness earlier. There's other cost actions and ITNs, and also research funding to one of my Irish colleagues, which gives us new opportunities. For example, Novel Eco is an award to Marcus Collier. It's from the ERC, so European Research Council Award, and it's focused on citizen science. And in fact, we actually will have a shared output between the two projects. This is something we're trying to develop, that collaborations aren't just in name only, but we actually end up with a shared output. We also work with an urban health cluster, which involves a number of projects funded under Horizon 2020, and we have a manifesto to develop and co-create with them. So we are part of this vast network with a shared mandate, and NATURA is actually, certainly one of the key hubs for us. Just to highlight that we have linked and clustered projects. Clustered are ones which were funded under the same call. Linked projects are those in which we have partners. So we have partners from Renature, from Connecting Nature. You're probably familiar with these actions with ProGI Reg, and with Diamond, which is actually a sustainability, gender and mobility research project. What this means is that we actually seek out to have joint training missions, have transnational events, and in some cases, joint surveys. So we've conducted a survey of 4 European cities, looking at, activity, going to nature, and attitudes towards sustainability during COVID lockdown times. And this is with the Renature project led by Mario Balzan. So there are huge opportunities, I would suggest, by this type of networking, shared advocacy mission. So the clustered projects, they're within this call, which was visionary integrated solutions to improve health and well-being in cities. We're learning a lot from one another. We turned up, and just on one area, we were probably a little naive. We weren't the first project to do a copy and paste of, our gender section from one, previous project to this project. So very quickly we had to adapt, and I'll try explain how that happened. But essentially, we have clustering activities, which include shared indicators, a common glossary, a common approach to multidimensional health, which we're leading. And we get some extra funding actually from the European Commission called booster funding to work together. And we have a manifesto on gender inclusion and diversity. I'm just going to highlight these are some of the SDGs which connect us, in which we can, co-create new ideas and innovate. In other words, to ensure our best practice occurs, not based on what was written at the proposal stage in 2018, but when we're on the ground in 2022, that what we do is cutting edge. Just to highlight the role of gender equality, this is actually a policy-informed approach. It's a major driver both globally and the European Commission. And here's a quote from Maria Gabriel to explain, this has to resonate, within research projects, and that's something we work on. But not only that, it has to resonate in the types of methodologies we used. For example, I mentioned Umeå. Umeå is a city which has a long history of, focusing on women and physical activity, and they have genderized interventions and gender-sensitive methodologies, which promote women using green space, for example, and active travel, which are subject to different gender biases in mode choice in other cities. These are the pillars of gender diversity and inclusion. So we review deliverables in light of these issues. They're cross-cutting. We harmonize our approach. We actually run sensitizing training for our researchers and collaborators. And we actually developed a panel. Initially, we just had one gender monitor. We've actually had to move budgets to ensure we can give sufficient resource to this really important area. So we now have a panel, as you'll see, and this is the panel. So they come from ICLIE, from the city of EMEA, from Mental Health Europe, from Antwerp with significant experience in participatory methods, from the Transport, Gender and Mobility platform with Lorraine Darcy, and from Limerick. So this is our means of catching up on one of what we feel is the key cross-cutting issues for all NBS projects at the moment. We also created a learning ecosystem, and I would be honest and say this was very much informed by the kind of NATURA model, the idea to create a network. So we have this network. It's a little bit complicated here, but we have a strategic advisory board. We use them, really as a resource, very much so for our project. So we have a mentoring scheme is probably our greatest innovation here, which has just started. So more than a dozen researchers will be mentored by members of our advisory board over the timeline of the project. And we foresee this as a really important step to ensure that today's researchers become tomorrow's innovators and entrepreneurs. We have training schools. We're going to have one in the autumn this year, and we're looking for collaboration around that. And we have an academy cluster, which aren't just researchers, but also early career innovators and staff from municipalities and SMEs, as we call them, or small, medium enterprises. So it's bringing these minds together so they can, be better trained than, for example, my generation was in this area. This is very much led by the tail that wags the dog, to use that phrase. So our advisory board chairpersons, gave us a hint that the idea they would only look at at our outputs at deliverable, stage. They thought that was a little bit naive and said, okay, can we influence, the project a little bit more from the ground up? So when you're going through the planning of different interventions and actions. So, thanks to them, we've had to innovate very quickly. So we have an advisory board which covers all these different areas, and you probably know many of the people who are on it, like Matilda van den Bosch from the health sector, Thomas Callas, who's involved in urban design. So we have over 30 members of our advisory board panels. This was an interesting thought I had. I just tried to explain, not only do we have, researchers from the 18 countries which are part of the consortium, but we actually have more. That includes researchers from Mexico, Brazil, Canada, Australia, and USA. And that's not the exclusive list. And that tells you that, many of these are researchers who are now working in Europe, and, they're going through a process of acculturation or adapting to new cultures. And we're really interested in that process because, we think that this is how, NBS has a really good chance to proliferate when people travel overseas, just like as many Irish people do what we call the diaspora, that, they get new learnings and they're able to bring them back to their home country. This is very much complementary to the work of the NATURA network. And it's something we like to work in synergy with. I'm just going to give a hint at one or two other ideas before I finish. So one of them is how we view health. We view health not as unitary issues around ill health or well-being. We view them as multidimensional issues which are interconnected. I'll just give you one example. So sleep is both, a physical requirement and an indicator of mental health and well-being. We also, in our model of health, we connect sustainability, human-nature interactions. In other words, we connect human health to sustainability. In other words, we foresee that is an important aspect of people's health and well-being. And I'll just going to skip to this one here. Is one other aspect is environmental quality is an interesting issue for us because we have a lot of experts from air quality and noise pollution and soundscape research areas. And we're actually trying to revisit, how we judge and assess cities on environmental quality. Should it just be the co-hazards of noise and air pollution, or could it be the natural soundscape and other positive factors like biodiversity that are very important to enrich people's lives? So we're developing a new index which will encompass these positive factors. SDG mapping is central to what we do, and I've tried to show that through the presentation here. And just for example, look on something we call green exercise, so exercising in a natural green space, for example, that is linked to all the SDGs that you can see here. So it's very important that we look at these interlinkages. And just to conclude, this is probably our approach. Don't walk in front of me, I may not follow. Don't walk behind me, I may not lead. Walk beside me, just be my friend. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tadhg, for the wonderful presentation. Does anyone have any questions for Tadhg? If so, please unmute yourself and speak up, or send it in the chat.
Yeah, I guess I have a question. This is Nancy. That was great. I really enjoyed it. And, it seems like you have kind of a parallel. You told us a lot about structures that have to do with a network, which you sort of are, a network. Do you have ongoing sort of research within those 6 cities, or are you connecting existing research that's already going on there?
Yeah, well, depends who's listening, right? So honestly, no, we obviously, we have a lot of, even though we're in innovation action, we are primarily comprised of nerds. So we have a lot of pure hard research, including a clinical trial, could you believe? So, sorry, an RCT. So the other side of that is cities have to be pragmatic. So some of what they're doing with us is something which had already been pre-planned and preordained, and they don't, in a 4-year project, can't start from zero, right? So that's the honest answer to that. I would say it's more about connecting what they're doing to either broader health dimensions or a more positive view of the environment. I think it's Howard Frumkin wrote a paper, said beyond toxicity, and that's kind of our approach to nature. Let's look at nature in these, with this more positive lens.
Yeah, that's great.
I have a question as well. Thank you for the presentation. So for your mentoring program for the early careers, because we've been thinking something similar in the NATURA early career network, who can participate in your mentoring program? Is there any specific qualification to participate it,
Yeah, I have to say, this literally came from one of the advisory board. And Claudio Nigan, a very well-established scientist, and he suggested we go down this pathway, and we had the discussions from Marcus and others about the NATURA network. And in our case, what we did is we said we'll roll it out pretty much mainly with the science-related partners, and then the advisory board all put their hands up. Like there was more than 20 people in the advisory board put their hands up. So we're like, okay, it'll be a bit broader. The timeline is agreed is at least 1 year and perhaps more. So it's not quite the full timeline of the project, but there's a review. So they meet monthly generally, and then there's one meeting where all the mentees and all the mentors meet. So that it counts for 1 month of the year, and it's something we're documenting and researching. So we don't know the outcomes yet, but we also made sure that people that were mentors had experienced mentoring before or had been mentees, and then we obviously set up certain documentation and guidelines and formats to give a framework for this. But as you know, in these scenarios, actually the most insightful elements will be ones which are more spontaneous than that. What I think it does to people in a consortium is say, we actually care. We actually want you to develop as a researcher. Honestly, I don't need another, Q1 or publication. It doesn't matter to me. What we can do is something much more innovative. And also, I would say, as a researcher who works in that stream whereby with graduate students, with your wider network, you know what the gaps are. And one of the gaps is, a supervisor in the research context, a supervisor-supervisee relationship can be very narrow, and we might need other influencers. And we're opening up the window to that. And it's not to compete against that traditional academic relationship, but to augment it.
So is there like a specific date that call for like applications to participate?
Yeah, so honestly, it just kicked off in May. So it's not long going, but I know pretty much all the first round meetings have happened. And it's something we'll, once we have it, I guess, running, for a certain period, perhaps next spring, we can open it up. And we're definitely, we'd be interested if other people want to come in as mentees, and we can look at other forms of collaboration, because we don't own this space. We're just trying to ensure that if you're in our project, that you're not blindfolded in handcuffs. You at least have somebody holding your hand, like Albert Camus would say, and you have your eyes open.
Yeah, that's really great. I think the NATURA approach is a little bit more focused on providing opportunities, sort of for a few people to have a longer term experience. But through the early career network, we're very interested in developing a network of people who can be peer mentors for each other. And so I think the two approaches are really complementary.
Yeah.
And it would be great for your folks who are your early career folks who are in your project to join the NATURA early career network. And then for our early career people to be able to, have access potentially to what you guys are setting up there.
Yeah, we'd welcome that. Thanks.
Great. Claire.
Hi, Tadhg. Great presentation. I just had a question about all the different cases across which you're doing your monitoring. Are you collecting same types of indicators across those different cases so that you can do some cross-case comparison? And if you are doing that, how are you doing it given the restrictions with COVID?
Oh, good point. Essentially, we have we're inert or asleep at the moment. Like, we're doing all the back channel work. There's been a lot of work done directly with municipalities or cities, but not so much with citizens yet, because our timeline is such we don't really have to have boots on the ground until perhaps 2022 or a little bit in autumn this year. So, COVID is a terrifying vista in many ways, but it hasn't had as big an impact upon our project. And unfortunately, we've actually lost one staff member in municipality passed away from COVID. So there is it's not unique. Everybody is affected by COVID, and that's tough. On the other side, the indicators. So with 6 targeted cities, and we have other tiers. So we've got the typical wedding cake scenario. You might have an NBS project. So we've some for knowledge exchange, some for some training events, and then we call cultivating cities are the 6 targeted ones. Across about 4 of those, we plan to do the same thing, and across at least 2 of them will try do something different from the get-go. And I'll give you an example why. Burgas is is beside blue space in Bulgaria, Caspian Sea, I think, and it opens up a whole vista of other solutions. And there's a recent Horizon project, Blue Health 2020, which is very advanced in this area. So we can use their learnings there. And Umea, because of their genderized interventions, give us a different focus, which we can, I guess, expand our horizons and learn from best practice there. The other cities, we aim to be using similar methods so we get the, the pan-European context as best as possible. So it's a really good question. Thanks.
I think we are at time or beyond time, but Nishant, did you have a quick comment or question? You've had your hand up.
Yeah, and say like, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Tadhg, for wonderful presentation. I was just wondering, like, to request some perspectives on South Asian cities, where like we have like cities within a larger city, both in terms of time and space. So, like, can you like just give a quick overview of how what you just discussed can be contextualized for such cities where we have multiple pockets which have undergone very different levels of urbanization. Even the way we are trying to build like satellite cities near like larger top 5 or 7 cities, they all follow a different trajectory.
Yeah, I'll be honest, it's not an area I can speak to about, you know, with much expertise, being a psychologist working on the project. But Versailles fits within that realm, I think. You know, it's within the hinterland of Paris. The other cities don't quite. So they're, you know, the policy of Paris around air pollution impacts upon Versailles, right? Because air pollution doesn't know any boundaries. And there's rivalry across the cities, you know, between the mayors. If they don't share the same political affiliations, they tend not to want to be followers, right? In the Irish context, Limerick is planned to be one of the cities which will help with the, I guess, some degree of displacement or migration from our capital city. You know, which is a population of over 1 million and Limerick 100,000. So we have this asymmetry, and it's obviously not unusual that the capital city would have this huge asymmetry with other cities. I put in another way is the lessons we have will best apply to European cities of a population circa 100,000, right? And perhaps won't best apply to the model you're talking about, where only Versailles will really speak to that. And given that the 4-year timeline, which is very tight when you're doing implementing green infrastructure and other elements on the ground, I would say what you raise is a really interesting question, but I'm not sure we'll address it in great detail.
I think this would be a great topic to bring up in the sort of the the Asian node of NATURA, and to be talking about the comparisons that might exist there. I think we're losing people because we're way past time, but I want to thank Manuel and Tadhg for great presentations. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you'll keep coming. And everybody have a great day or night.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.